Here's a question for you. Have you ever had that moment where somebody did something so dumb, unnerving, ridiculous, whatever, or maybe it was after they had done those things 20 times, right, where you've hit a wall, like you're ready to snap? Anybody ever experience? I want to make sure I'm not just preaching to me this morning. I don't know where it happens for you. I would assume that a lot of times it happens when you're watching the news. Maybe, I don't know. You hear people doing crazy things. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's at school. But that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole sermon series. There are things that become really hot in our lives. Conversations, beliefs, you can label all kinds of things, but there are these hot topics that we've been talking about for 2 months now. And I just want to say I am so grateful for the men that have been preaching for the past 3 weeks. I think they've done an incredible job of taking us down a road and helping us walk through some of those hot topics. Of course, we couldn't cover them all, but just did a really good job of helping us navigate those things and listen to Jesus and how he would encourage us and disciple us, if you will, on those topics. So can we give those guys a hand? That's Leonard, Carrie, and Brian. I don't know if they're in the room, but thank you very much. Really did a great job, and I'm a little jealous that Leonard preached shorter than I did, but that's not hard to do. But so we've been talking about this stuff, and I think we all reach that point. For me, it isn't so much watching the news or TV or even my workplace. It's pretty tame. But for me, when I get really heated is in traffic, on the road, because I don't know if you've noticed this, but there are some really bad drivers out there. Anybody else experience this? And I don't know what this new trend is, this new phenomena of running red lights. Is it amping up in your world like it is? Maybe it's just me. Maybe I've got a sign that says, please run this red light and make me have a heart attack. Because it seems like it's happening all the time. And I got to be honest with you, it's just your preacher being confessional. It makes me like really angry. Like I'm not being proud of that. I don't want you to think I'm saying that, but it's one of those things that just really lights my fire, if you will. It makes me think things I don't want to think. Now I will also, I'm proud of myself for this, I don't lash out. I don't sin in my anger unless my thoughts maybe there, right? But that just really irritates me. So I'm glad that my commute to work is 0.4 of a mile. And I usually don't even see anybody on the road getting here, so that's good. But we've got those moments, right? And I think I really appreciate this sermon series because I think it's important for us to talk about those things. But it leads us to a question, and I'll be honest with you, through this whole process, I have probably gotten this question asked of me at least 4 times. I'm thinking maybe 5, but I can't think of who the 5th person is. And I want to say this before I give you the question. I'm not judging this question. I'm not judging the people that are asking this question. I think this is a fair question. But the question I keep getting is, when do we get to start flipping tables? Right? In this heated culture, in all of these arenas where I get really upset, I've got some really strong beliefs, and there are people on the other side of the aisle, whatever that might look like, that think very differently than me, and they're mean, and they're abusive, and they're angry, and they bring all this stuff to my table, to my workplace. When do I get to start getting mad like Jesus did? Right? When do I get to start flipping tables? When does that moment come for me as a Christian where I don't just keep sucking it up, I don't just keep being patient, I don't just keep being silent, but I actually do something? And I think part of the reason we get to that question is because we are watching the world. We live in the world. We're not of the world, but we live in the world, right? And we watch how the world reacts. And the truth is, the world does that kind of stuff. They are flipping tables. They are rioting. They are doing this bad behavior and that bad behavior. And the truth is, it's getting attention, and sometimes that attention does change things for the better. And so Christians watch this activity and we go, well, it's working for them. Maybe it should work for Christians too. And then we read a passage in Matthew 21 where Jesus flipped tables. And if my inclination is already to be mad, to be angry, to make some change happen in my world, and I want to flip tables, I read that and get my permission to do it from Jesus. And I think that's dangerous. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So, when do we get to start flipping tables? Where does that question come from? In fact, what makes me think I have a right to flip tables, to get to that point? Well, there's this thing that we throw around in Christian circles called righteous anger. Anybody heard that phrase? Because I've got this righteous anger building up in me. We assume that that's what Jesus was experiencing in this table flipping moment that we're going to read about, that there was this righteous anger. And so we look at that and go, that's right, I've got some strong feelings about some stuff too, and the things that I have strong feelings about are biblical things, and therefore it makes my anger righteous. And I'm not sure that's true. If you go to James 1, and we looked at James 1, I don't know, several weeks ago, I can't remember what week, but I want to remind you of something that is said here. James says in verse 19, that everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. And then he says this, because human anger does not produce the, say it, righteousness that God desires. Now, I'm taking this in the simplest form. I haven't done a deep dive on this particular passage of Scripture, but that sounds to me like we as humans are not capable of righteous anger. That when we combine human anger with all these feelings that we have, and maybe even with a thus saith the Lord, that anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Now, what kind of righteousness does God desire? When God gets upset about something, when he lives out his righteous anger, and we'll talk about this a little bit with Jesus in a moment, the purpose was to help people. It was to restore people. It was to bring people back into a relationship with God. And that's where I start questioning our righteous anger. I mean, how do you know the difference between righteous anger and me just being angry about something I've deemed righteous? You hear the difference? And so we're going to take a little look at that. And so we think about those things. We hear that word righteous anger. We feel righteous in our anger. We think we have a just cause. We think that being angry about that just cause is righteous in itself. And so we give ourselves permission to do some things that I'm not convinced Jesus gives us permission to do. And so we get to that question, I feel righteously angry about this, so when do I get to start flipping tables? It's a fair question. We're going to answer it today. So I'm going to ask you to turn over to Mark. All of the gospel writers write about this moment in time. If you're new here, if you're new to the Bible, you may be going, I am completely lost. I have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about Jesus flipping tables. We're going to read it, okay? So hang on. Mark chapter 11. The other gospel writers write about it. Matthew writes about it in chapter 21. Luke writes about it in chapter 19. It's a very short passage, but we're going to read out of Mark chapter 11 because it includes everything they say, but it gives us a little more context, a little more information. So here's what it says in Mark 11, starting in verse 15. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables. That's where we get it from. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, is it not written?" And this is a quote from Isaiah 56, "My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. But you have made it a," quote, "den of robbers," which is another quote from Jeremiah. I want to read the account in John chapter 2 also, because I want to give us a little more context. So in John chapter 2, starting in verse 13, it says this: "When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money." Before we go any further, I just kind of want to give you some context. So people would come to Jerusalem for Passover. Many of them were poor. Many of them didn't have livestock and all the things that were required to provide a sacrifice on Passover. And so when they got there, they would purchase one. Okay? And my guess is, I don't know this for sure, but my guess is that these merchants were set up initially, possibly to help people. They were selling doves, which would have been cheaper to buy than a bull or a lamb or something like that. But they were selling them to these people that were coming in from distant lands to be a part of Passover and to offer their sacrifice to God, okay? So there were people there selling that stuff. There were also people there that were exchanging money. So people would come with money from Rome and other places, had the stamp of the seal of that country or that province on their money, but they would exchange it for money that was acceptable in the temple, because Roman money wasn't acceptable for temple stuff. And so they would exchange money, and they would take that money, and then they would go buy something. Well, what had happened, it appears, is that people were taking advantage of them. So it was like going to the ATM. You go to the ATM, you want to pull out $20, it's going to cost you $3, right? Same type of thing. We should start going to gas stations and tipping over ATMs. So they were being taken advantage. There was a charge, there was a surcharge for doing that, and it was becoming crazy. It was becoming ridiculous, okay? When they were selling them doves, they were just making extra money on them, and people were taking advantage. And I'm not saying those people shouldn't have been compensated for the service they were providing, but it was getting out of hand. So this is what's happening in the temple, and Jesus sees it. And he says, so he made a whip. I don't know how long it takes to make a whip. Was it Trevor or Tanner that made a whip for me? Or maybe it was Timothy. One of the Holloway boys. Was it Trevor? How long did it take you to make that whip, Trevor? How long? Couple days. And it wasn't a long one, the one I have. It's still in my office. It was just like a flogging whip. But took some time. Jesus sits down and takes the time to make a whip out of cords, and he drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." See, Christians who already are upset about something read that and go, "That's the Jesus I want to follow." Right? That's the Jesus I want to be at my workplace. That's the Jesus I want to be when I'm talking politics with people. That's the kind of Jesus I can get on board with. I want to turn tables. And so we gravitate to that. They say, this is the kind of Christianity that I'm about. This is the kind of Jesus that I want to follow. This morning, I want to take us through what I call three table flipping moments with Jesus. I got some more to say about that. The first one is this: Peter's sword moment. Some of you probably remember this, others may not, but Jesus has spent some time in the Garden of Gethsemane before he gets arrested. Before he's going to be crucified, he's been praying. He's asked them to wait for him. They kind of failed, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot that goes on. After they're done praying, Judas, the betrayer, one of the 12, leads Roman soldiers and some officials from the Pharisees and the teachers of the law up there to arrest Jesus. He betrays Jesus with a cheek on the kiss, identifies him as the one that calls himself the Messiah, the troublemaker, and they're going to arrest him. Okay? Peter, who we know to be not very controlled sometimes, right? Someone that kind of speaks before he thinks sometimes does before he thinks. Peter has a reaction. Now, this happens in John 18. It's also recorded in the other three Gospels. But in John 18, starting in verse 10, here's what it says. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, what did he say? Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? I also want to read Luke chapter 22, another account of this. Starting in verse 50, it says, and one of them, doesn't name Peter. John's the only one that names Peter. John's the only one that names Malchus. And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, am I leading a rebellion? What's the answer to that question? No. No. I want to be very clear about that. Because some of the same Christian people who want to start flipping tables want to rebel. Okay? Jesus said he didn't come to lead a rebellion. I just want you to know Jesus said that. Have I come to lead a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you didn't lay a hand on me. But this, your hour, when darkness reigns. I want you to hear the words of Jesus. This is Peter's flipping tables moment. Okay? This is Peter's response. This is his equivalent, at least in his mind, of Jesus flipping the tables over. I'm not saying that's what was going through his mind, but this is his version of it. This is my version of lashing out and making a scene and doing something drastic because a point needs to be made here. I'm not okay with what is happening. I don't like the direction this is going. You are not going to kill my Messiah. For us, it would be you are not going to trample over my cause. And I'm going to rise up and I'm going to do something physical about it. And Jesus looks at Peter and he says, put your sword away. Get your hand off the table and back up. Put your sword away. He says it to the Romans and the officials that are there, but I think a portion of what he is about to say to them resonates with Peter, that I didn't come to lead a rebellion. You guys came up here to arrest me and you brought swords and torches and clubs and all this stuff like I'm some kind of rebellion leader. That has never been who I am. You've seen me preaching in the temple courts day after day after day and you didn't do a thing there, and now all of a sudden you approach me like I'm leading a rebellion. Well, maybe Peter's the reason. So this peaceful, innocent Messiah, sinless Messiah, has just been praying. He's being arrested. It's chaos. And Peter, who, I'm not trying to throw Peter under the bus. I want you to understand, Peter loves Jesus deeply. Peter cares about the cause of Christ. In fact, Peter is the one that Jesus is going to give the keys to the kingdom to. Peter is one of his top guys, one of the people he can trust, apparently one of the people who also has his back. He's the guy that speaks impulsively. He's the one that acts out when he's not supposed to act out. He answers when he should just be quiet and listen. But he pulls the sword out because he loves Jesus, and he hacks off Malchus's ear, and Jesus bends down and heals him. He tells Peter to stop. Put your sword away. Here's what I want us to think about. And I think this is something we need to concentrate on. That Peter thought the battle was against people. Let me say that differently. Peter thought the battle was against people. Jesus knew the battle was for people. Do you hear the difference? And that will change how you are received when you approach people, especially in these heated moments, in these heated conversations that we get in with people. So let's think about Peter in that realm. Okay, let's go to the second one. The second one is James and John's fire from heaven moment. Some of you probably remember this. We're going to read it out of Luke chapter 9. I'm going to start reading in verse 51. Here's what it says. As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead who went into Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there, the Samaritans, did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. Now listen to this. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, this is what they asked. Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? I don't know about you, but I can kind of imagine them stretching. All right, God, you ready? You want us to strike them dead? You want us to bring down fire out of heaven so that they will be destroyed? This is their table flipping moment. That's the question they're asking, just in a different way. When do we get to start flipping tables? When do we do something drastic, something physical, something that will get their attention, that will cause people to take notice and get them to change? When do we get to start? You want us to start flipping tables, Lord? We'll start flipping tables right now. You want us to call down fire from heaven? We'll call down fire from heaven. I am so glad that Christians don't have this ability today. This world would be on fire. And that's sad. They at least had the presence of mind to ask Jesus if he wanted them to do it. What did Jesus say? You want an answer to your table flipping question? Look at what Jesus said to these guys. You want us to call down fire from heaven to destroy them? Jesus turned and rebuked them. Jesus turned and rebuked them. The disciples go ahead of Jesus to this Samaritan village. He's on his way to Jerusalem. They reject him because he's on his way to Jerusalem. I've got to do some more studying on that. But they don't like that he's going to Jerusalem, probably because they know he's a Jew, and, Jews aren't supposed to go through Samaritan land and all that stuff. But they reject him. They don't like him. They don't want to listen to him. They don't want him there. They don't want his disciples there. And they say, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven? And Jesus says, no, I don't want you to flip tables. See, that's the way I just said it is not the way Jesus said it. I don't know what a rebuke from Jesus would sound like in this moment, but it says he rebuked him. We don't know all that he was said. We're going to actually go into that a little bit more in the class that follows. But we don't know all that Jesus said here. But I have to believe that whatever he said had to resonate with all the other things that he had said as they were walking along with Jesus all the years that they were walking along with them. Jesus is very consistent. So if you go to John 3:16, we know John 3:16 really well, right? Everybody read it with me. Can you throw it up there? John 3:16 should be on there. There you go. Okay, yeah, let's do it together. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever should believe him would not perish, but have everlasting life. You know what verse 17 says? Verse 17 says, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn it, but to save the world through him. You see, I don't know that when do we start flipping tables is an unfair question. I guess the question I would have before, or maybe Jesus would have, is what result are you trying to get? Are you trying to win the argument, or are you trying to win the person? Are you trying to win the culture war by having the right answer and blasting them with it, or are you trying to win a soul? Are you trying to win this war, or are you trying to save somebody? Because if the answer isn't the latter on all three of those, your motivation's wrong. And so you shouldn't even be asking the question if your motivation is wrong. If you just want to blast people, if you just want to get the world's attention and fight the way the world does and do it the way the world does just to get things changed, you're going down the wrong path. I can't say it any more strongly than that. You are not listening to Jesus. I want to read you a couple of other passages just to give context. Again, I don't know exactly what Jesus said to these guys in his rebuke, but it had to be consistent with the other things that he had taught all the time that he had been with them. And in Luke chapter 19, Jesus said, "For the Son of Man came to seek and save the..." You know this. In John 12, Jesus said, "I did not come to judge the world, but to save it." If your motivation isn't to save somebody, isn't to bring somebody closer to Jesus, but just to set them on fire, your motivation's wrong. Your motivation is not aligned with the motivation of Jesus. And Jesus looks at these guys, and they're no different than us. See, they think, again, that the battle is against people and not for people. We think sometimes when things get heated that the battle is against people and not for people. And so when we do that kind of stuff, Jesus sits back, I think, and looks at us and says, "Guys, you guys are defending me in a way that completely misrepresents me. The way you're doing it is not showing them the real character of me." We're going to talk about that in just a minute. All right, the last one. Last flipping tables incident. But this is really, there aren't many disciples around when this happens, but Jesus refers to his disciples in this, and this is when Jesus is standing before Pilate. He has already been arrested. We just read about that a moment ago. He's been brought before Pilate. The Jews are like, he needs to be crucified. You got to crucify him. Pilate's kind of confused. He doesn't know what's going on. If this guy is really leading a rebellion, if he's really wanting to be king, there should be something physical going on. He won't even defend himself when he's standing here, so he's interrogating Jesus, asking him all kinds of questions. This is something that Jesus says in John 18, verse 36, that I think is really powerful, and he says it to Pilate. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. If my kingdom were of this world, I would tell my servants, go flip tables. I would tell them to call down fire from heaven and destroy people. If my kingdom were of this world, if I fought the way this world does, I wouldn't have told Peter to sheathe his sword. I would have said, you go for it." But every time one of those things happen, Jesus stops them dead in their tracks and says, "That's not my kingdom. That's not what I'm here for. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight. But now my kingdom is not from here." Church, we have got to stop watching how the world fights and then thinking that's how we fight. We got to stop. Our kingdom that we are a part of is not of this world, so stop taking our cues from the world. The world's going to keep setting the world on fire. The world is going to keep yelling nasty, ugly things at people. They're going to name call. They're going to do all kinds of stuff. They're going to flip tables. They're going to protest. They're going to stand nose to nose, screaming so loud at each other that they're spitting on each other. And Jesus looks at us and says, "That is not what I've called you to do." See, we're not getting a lot of amens on that. Because, see, we've bought into, on some level, the way the world does things, and we think, fight fire with fire. You know who didn't say that? We got to stop matching the world's way of fighting these battles. We've got to stop, and it has to stop here, and it has to stop in this room today. Jesus is making it clear to Pilate that he didn't come to overthrow Pilate or Herod or Caesar or the Roman government. Jesus didn't come to overthrow any of those. He came to overthrow sin. And he came to seek and save people that are lost in it. That's our job. We talked many weeks ago about us being ambassadors for Christ. That's our job. To overthrow sin, not to add to it, not to throw kindling on the fire and just get it to flame up and flame up and flame up. Our job, our mission, church, isn't to win culture wars. It's to win souls. It's to defeat sin in people's hearts. So, back to the question. When do we get to start flipping tables? Here's the answer. Right now. Like, wait, what? You just said we're not supposed to flip tables. Okay, I want you to hear me out on this, okay? I want you to go back in Scripture. I want you to listen to what Matthew 21 is saying, but I'm not going to read it again. We've already read it a little bit. I just want to ask you some questions. Where was Jesus when he overturned the tables? Where was he? He was in the temple. Okay. Who resides in the temple? God, right? It was the physical representation of the place where God dwelled, right? Now, we all know now he's everywhere at all times, right? But he lived in the temple. He manifested his presence in the temple, in the Holy of Holies. So when people came to the temple, they were trying to get as close to God as they could possibly get. Okay? Now, the tables themselves. So the temple is where Jesus flipped the tables. The temple is where God lives. When Jesus flipped the tables, I want you to remember what Jesus said. He said, "My Father's house is a place of prayer for all nations." Did you hear that? For all nations. It's a quote. He's quoting Isaiah 56. For all nations. And you have turned it into a den of robbers, right? Quoting Jeremiah. Okay, if it is a place of prayer for all nations, here's what you need to understand. You can read Josephus, you can read Tacitus, you can read some other Jewish historians from that time. They will tell you that the marketplace, the place where they were selling doves, the place where they were exchanging money, happened in one of four courts in the temple. It was the court of the Gentiles. It was the only place in the temple anywhere where commerce was allowed to happen. Okay? It wasn't going to happen in the priest's court. It wasn't going to happen in the men's court. It wasn't going to happen in the women's court. That was all for Jewish people. It was going to happen where the Gentiles had to come. But Gentiles came to the court of the Gentiles to pray. That's where they came to get connection with God, to get close to God. Do you see why Jesus is so upset? These people, these Jewish people who are trying to make money and take advantage of people, have now turned this space where people can only come. The only people that can come there are Gentiles, or at least they're the ones that it's for. They can come there and connect with God, and now they've turned it into a den of thieves, so it no longer is performing the job it was supposed to do, therefore blocking the Gentiles from being able to worship God. Do you see why Jesus is upset? He says, my Father's house is a house of prayer for all nations. In order for all nations, which would include Gentiles, to be able to do that, that space needed cleared out. That's why Jesus is upset. Jesus walks in and says this, there's one place that's designated for these lost people, these people that aren't Jews, to come in and pray, and you're taking that and you're abusing it. And you're hijacking it. And you're turning it into something it was never supposed to be. I want you to think about this. Jesus didn't flip Pilate's table. When he was before Pilate, he didn't even speak. I'm sure there were some tables in the room where the interrogation was happening. I don't read anything about Jesus flipping Herod's table. I don't read anything about Jesus flipping Caesar's table. I don't read anything about Jesus flipping tax collectors' tables. He didn't flip Zacchaeus' table at his house. I don't read about him flipping the woman caught in adultery's table, if she even had one. The only time we see Jesus acting like this is in his Father's house that has been designed for people to come and worship in. And he says, you have hijacked this space and turned it into something it wasn't supposed to be. And you're preventing people that need to see me. Who did Jesus come to seek and save? The lost, which would include Gentiles. You're preventing them. You've created a barrier with these tables and with all the stuff that's happening on top of them so that they can't get to me. So that they can't get to my Father. My kingdom is not of this world. When do we get to start flipping tables? Why did you say now? Well, follow me here. God lived, he dwelled in the temple, correct? Where does God dwell now? In us, the new temple, right? Agreed, right? That's scriptural. We are now the temple. So here's my question to us. What tables have you set up in your heart, in the court of your heart where God resides, that is preventing other people from worshiping him? Do you hear the connection I'm trying to make for us? If I lash out at other people and I start flipping their tables, I don't know what good I'm doing. Maybe it's time I take a good hard look at me and start flipping tables in my heart. Because maybe I have allowed some things that all started with a good purpose turn into something. Maybe my belief in the truth or my defense of the hopeless and the helpless and all, maybe that has turned into something that has turned ugly, and now it's this table that is preventing other people from being able to see Jesus in my life. God lives in me now. If I call myself a disciple, Brian did a great job talking about that a couple of weeks ago. God lives in me now. I am now an ambassador for Christ. But what if I have set up a table in my life of judgment? What if now, where I was trying to be honest about the scriptures and tell people the truth about their own lives, what if I've set up a table of judgment in my life where now we're exchanging compassion for condemnation? What if we're making that exchange? Maybe it's not Roman money to temple money, but maybe I've stopped giving compassion and now I'm giving condemnation, and I've set up this table of judgment in my life. What if I've set up a table of self-righteousness? Now, they need more grace than I ever needed, right? Instead of remembering that I need as much grace or more than the person I'm upset with needs. So I treat them differently, and now I lash out at them in my self-righteousness. Maybe I've set that table up. Maybe I've set up a table of unforgiveness. Maybe somebody has said something to me, done something to me, and now I feel like I have a right to some righteous anger about that. And so now I'm exchanging what Jesus said about forgiving 70 times 7 for being able to hold a grudge and be mad at somebody. Maybe I've set up a table here of comfort where I'm just going to take the easiest path. I'm not really going to work hard. I'm not really going to be effective in the kingdom. I'm just going to sit back and relax and be comfortable. How does that get in the way of people that don't know Jesus seeing Jesus in me? Its partner is the table of indifference. What if I just don't care? What if I'm on my social media posts, I'm saying things that are absolutely true, I just don't care how it's received? I don't care whose toes I'm stepping on. I don't care how it's landing on them. I'm not trying to be gentle or kind about it. I just like the bare facts. And I don't really care about how you feel about it. What about this whole table of virtue signaling? We hear about this all the time. Because I have chosen a specific cause to get really on fire about, and you didn't pick the same cause, now I'm better than you. Because I am a virtuous person. Because I have chosen this. Guys, we can set up table after table after table after table in our hearts, and those tables prevent the lost from seeing Jesus the way that Jesus wants to be seen. So if you want to start flipping tables, why don't we flip some of these? Why don't we get in our hearts and really take a hard look instead of being so mean-spirited and ugly toward other people? I'm just trying to be honest with us. I'm not trying to be mean. But why don't we get in our hearts and start knocking over some tables? You want to knock over some tables? You want to start flipping tables? Do it in your life. Man, this whole finger point, we're becoming a part of the culture and we're fighting the way the culture fights. And Jesus said, my kingdom isn't of this world. My kingdom is different. When do we get to start flipping tables? Right now. But it's these. It's these tables. It's not the ones that everybody else sets up. It's not all the ones that I'm angry about. And I call it righteous anger. What if change, what if revival in our community started in this church today? And what if that revival started not with louder voices, not with angrier people, but with cleaner temples? What if we walked out of here and knocked all the tables over that we've set up in our hearts that create this situation where people can't even see Jesus enough? We cleaned up our temple before we walked out these doors. Do you think that might be received differently from someone than you going to their workplace and flipping over their table? I think it would. I want to read one last passage of Scripture. This is 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5. Here's what it says. Just listen closely. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they, talking about our weapons, have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience once your obedience is complete. I want to focus on that because the people that want to flip tables over like that last sentence. They like hearing that we will be ready to punish every act of disobedience once your obedience is complete, but we don't like that second part. See, Paul's talking about taking care of false teachers, but Paul is saying to these people, we don't fight like the world fights. We don't wage war like the world wages war. We don't use the same weapons of anger and hatred and vitriol that the world uses. We don't do it that way. So clean up your own life. We will take care of the false teachers. But hear what he says in that last sentence. We'll take care of the false teachers once your obedience is complete. You want God to take care of this stuff that's going on? And I agree with you that there is egregious stuff going on in our society right now. Beliefs that are so contrary to the beliefs of Christ and the teachings of Christ that they're just unpalatable for us. We don't like hearing about them. We don't like seeing them. We don't want to be a part of it. But Paul says even to these people, you clean up yourself. You clean your temple. You flip the tables in your heart. And let God take care of that. But stop fighting like the world fights. So here's the thing. What if we're asking the wrong question? What if the question isn't, when do we get to start flipping tables? Wouldn't a more Christ-like question be, when do we get to start washing feet. You see, when Jesus washed the disciples' feet at that Last Supper, remember Peter, once again, you're not going to wash any part. No. And Jesus like, if I don't wash you, you can't have any part of me. And he's like, okay, knock yourself out, right? But you remember what Jesus said after he did that? He said, the things that you have seen me do, go and do likewise. What did he say? Go wash other people's feet. You know what Jesus didn't say after he flipped tables? He didn't turn to his disciples and, no, I want you guys to go start flipping tables. He never said that. So I don't know what makes us think we have permission. You want to start flipping tables, if you are on fire for flipping tables, do this. Right? Speak truth in the world. Do it in a loving and kind way. Okay? It doesn't mean that you have to be passive and be a doormat for everybody to wipe their feet on. You can stand for the truth, but you can do that and be loving and kind and gentle at the same time. It's possible, I promise you. Church, let's be the beginning of a different conversation in these hot topics when we get out in the workplace and at school, in our neighborhood, in our family reunions, all the places where they happen. We need to think differently. Let's pray. Lord God, thank you for the way you love us and bless us. Father, I know this took a minute to get this point out here, Father, but I pray that at the end of this sermon series, we can walk out with a better grasp on your word about how we are supposed to operate on this earth. As members of a kingdom that is different than anything on this earth, Father, I pray that we can act differently and that we can not wage war the way the world does, but we do it the way you want it done in your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.